Hey physiology class, welcome to Friday's lecture. It's the completion of chapter 1, the homeostasis chapter. We still have to finish regulation of blood pressure and talk about blood pH and how that's important in human health. Okay, so I'm going to begin by sharing my screen and just getting you caught up to where we are this week and then what's going on next week and show you where all the materials are. Okay, so let's share that screen. Okay, so here is the syllabus, the online syllabus, and I hope you've been checking that out. That is where all the information is. And so we are past the introduction. That was on Monday, and that's posted. The link is right here. Wednesday, I started chapter 1, homeostasis, positive and negative feedback loops, and that link to that Zoom video is here. And then, of course, today's lecture is Friday, is the completion of that chapter 1. Please remember that there's a practice exam for this chapter and a study outline, as well as blank flow diagrams, and they're key to practice these negative feedback loops. We've got one for temperature, we've got one for blood glucose regulation, we've got one for low blood pressure and high blood pressure. And while I'm thinking of those feedback loops, I want to let you know about, for the blood pressure feedback loops, let's click on the blank right here. I've got two pathways. Here's an important thing, and I hope you're watching these videos. The only one that you have to be concerned with is the aortic arch and carotid artery baroreceptor response. This, on the right-hand side, we won't get to the juxtaglomerular apparatus of the kidneys until well into the chapter on the cardiac system. So again, it's only the baroreceptor and medulla's response. The same thing holds true for, let me move this screen so I can get to it. Okay, so I'm going to back out of that. For the high blood pressure, if I click on that, now on the right-hand side is the baroreceptor and medulla response that you want to practice. On the left, it says heart baroreceptors. You don't have to study that. That's not included for this chapter 1. What's on the left here? Heart baroreceptors. Again, we won't cover that until we get into the cardiovascular chapter. Okay, so that's important. Okay, back to the syllabus. Okay, next week, we're going to be starting chapter 2, part 1, cell metabolism. The PowerPoint PDF is up, and if you click that, that PDF will come up. And I want you to realize that within the PDF of the PowerPoint, while you're online, links remain active. Okay, so let me show you with that PowerPoint right there, and I will show you how I'll find a link for you. Waiting for this to load. And it also allows me to double check that it's working. Okay, should have had this up already. Okay, so here's our PowerPoint, and it's going to be a while until I find a link. So let that keep loading, and I'll come back to it. Okay, so I'll do the same thing I've done this week. I'll have a Monday Zoom lecture on YouTube, Wednesday and Friday lecture as well. Just like I did for chapter 1, I have a practice exam for this as well as a study outline. Now, next week, we are starting labs, although it's virtual, it's online, but you are going to be responsible for reading over the blood glucose regulation experiment and a sample data set. This is like data that we would have collected as a class where we're doing on-campus in-laboratory instruction. So this is the experiment you would have done, but I still want you to be responsible for the experimental protocol, the bold-faced vocabulary terms, and what the data shows us in that experiment. Okay, now you're not going to be graded on that, but what you will be graded on is the blood glucose regulation questionnaire. And those questions, almost all of them, you can answer by looking at the handout on the experiment and the data set I give you. There's going to be one question, the last one, question 10, where you're going to have to look at the YouTube video that will be posted by Monday before the 12:30 lab starts, okay? So you will have to look at that YouTube video to answer the very last question. Okay, now, for people who have a Monday lab, your questionnaire is due at the end of the day, 5 p.m. on Monday. Tuesday lab, your questionnaire is due at 5 p.m. on Tuesday. Wednesday lab, your questionnaire is due by 5 p.m. on Wednesday, okay? And that'll be what we do when there's a handout that you must fill out and turn in. Now that questionnaire, you'll click it And what it will simply be a Word document that you will download, fill it out, and then send it back to me. And what I want you to do is when you save this document, okay, so let's say I go ahead and open it up. And there it is. It's going to open up. Now you're going to want to put your name, you know, Stacy Q student. You're going to want to put your name on that, okay? And you're going to fill it out. And when you save it, what you're going to do is save it this way. So you want to say blood glucose lab questionnaire. You want to put Stacy Q student and save it that way so that when you send it to me, I know that's the blood glucose questionnaire for this student because I'm gonna have 45 of you and I can't put your names onto every file when I save them. This will save me so much time. So please always put your name in the file as you save it so that I know what document it is and who is submitting it. So please do that for me. I would really appreciate it. Okay, so that is the questionnaire. And that's how you get it. All right, let's get back to the PowerPoint presentation now that it's loaded. Okay, let's find a link to something. Oh, look at that. When I talk about lactic acid and heart attack, click here for a clinical app reading. While I'm looking at this PDF, I can click on it. Boom, there comes the reading on ischemia, and myocardial ischemia is loss of blood flow to the heart. So these links are active in the PDF while you're looking at it online. So please look at those links. Okay, so next week in lab, blood glucose lab, get the questionnaire, watch the YouTube video, make sure and turn that in by 5 p.m. of your scheduled lab day. Okay, I will also have additional flow diagrams for this next chapter that we cover next week, okay? So when I talk about glycolysis or glycogen and lipid metabolism and amino acid metabolism, I've got blank practice flow diagrams and they're key and it's all found on the syllabus. Okay, so let's finish the last of chapter 1. That's what this lecture is about. Okay, so here is our PowerPoint. This is where we left off. If you remember last time, we ended with regulation of blood glucose. What happens when blood glucose is too high? How does the body bring it down? And hopefully you now know that's insulin and how it works. And then if blood glucose is too low, how does the body regulate that through negative feedback to bring it back up? And hopefully you now know that's glucagon. Okay, so let's move on to regulating blood pressure. I told you that in the PD, you're going to have the big 3. Hypertension or problems regulating blood pressure, diabetes, problems regulating blood glucose, and general heart disease. Okay, so let's look at how the body regulates blood pressure. Now, we're going to have a laboratory later in the semester. Hopefully it'll be in person, but you never know. But, okay, let's say blood pressure drops below normal. And the normal is somewhere between, for systolic blood pressures, between 80 to 160 millimeters of mercury. That's the normal range where your body say, okay, blood pressure is between 80 to 160. No problem, we can handle that. But if blood pressure drops below 80 or goes above 160, the body deems that an emergency. Okay, so if you're lying flat, if you're just lying on the couch or flat on a bed, gravity is acting on your feet, your torso, and your head equally. It's acting on your circulatory blood vessels equally from head to toe. There is no real pressure differential. But as soon as you stand up quickly, all of a sudden your head is up here, your heart is here, and your feet are down here. Gravity wants to pull blood down from your head and neck, and blood is going to start to be pulled down in your carotid arteries, which are bringing oxygen and blood to your brain. So when you stand up quickly, momentarily, like for a few seconds, your blood pressure is going to drop because gravity is pulling your blood downward. So that's going to be a stimulus, a drop in blood pressure below the normal. So the stimulus is a momentary drop in blood pressure. Here is what the body does to fix that through negative feedback. Well, the stimulus is a drop in blood pressure. There are going to be sensors called baroreceptors, and they're going to be located in a very logical place. They're going to be located in your carotid arteries, which feed arterial blood to your brain. That's a really good place to have a blood pressure sensor. And also your aortic arch. So that is where blood is coming out at the greatest pressure in your body coming out of the heart. So those places, those arteries have pressure receptors or baroreceptors that can detect how much pressure is being pushed against the artery wall. Well, they're going to send that sensor information about drop blood pressure to an integrating center. This time it's going to be the medulla oblongata, part of your brainstem. Now, it's going to respond by stimulating effectors. And remember, effectors are muscle cells or glands. And in this case, it's going to be two types of muscles. So the medulla is going to stimulate your heart rate to increase right here. So your heart's going to go boop, 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 boop real fast. And that should drive up your blood pressure because whatever happens to heart rate, blood pressure follows directly. Okay, the other thing the medulla will do, it will stimulate your systemic arteries. Oops, right here. Here's my, see, I've got a little sign here for arteries, and I'll explain the garden hose analogy in a second. But your medulla will stimulate all the arteries in your body to vasoconstrict. That means they get narrower, okay? Now, when your arteries vasoconstrict, think of a garden hose analogy, which is a tube through which fluid is going through. If you stick your thumb over the opening of that garden hose and you narrow the diameter of the garden hose, look what happens. What happens is the velocity of the fluid traveling through that tube increases. So when your arteries vasoconstrict, the blood pressure passing through them goes up, okay? So the medulla increases heart rate. It causes arterial vasoconstriction, and both those things together will bring your blood pressure back up again. And the heart and arteries will fix this. This whole negative feedback pathway happens so quickly that within 10 seconds of standing up, your blood pressure has risen to overcome or compensate for the effect of gravity on your body so that you don't pass out, okay? If someone passes out when they stand up, they've probably got something going on, okay? Because most healthy people can go from a lying or even a sitting position and stand upright, and the increased heart rate and arterial vasoconstriction compensates for the effect of gravity and keeps your blood going up to your brain, okay? So that's what's happening with one part of the negative feedback loop when blood pressure drops too low. Let's go to the next screen and talk about both scenarios. Okay, so page 5 of the wiki text. I'm going to stop the share screen for just a second because I do want to emphasize something to you. Okay, page 5 of the wiki text talks about negative feedback. It also talks about positive feedback. I happen to have the wiki textbook up, and I've got it on page 1. If you follow your PowerPoint and you simply type in page 5 when it tells you in the PowerPoint, it will take you right to that page and you'll be able to see, oh, this is where Dr. Barbeau talks all about negative feedback regulation of blood pressure. So this is in the textbook when you want to read the corresponding material, okay? So I want you to know when I put page numbers in the PowerPoint, you can type those page numbers right into the wiki text, take you right to it. Real convenient. Okay, I'm not going to save it. Okay, let's go back to our PowerPoint. Now, if the stimulus, this is a repeat of the previous slide, if the stimulus is blood pressure drops too low, okay, below 80 millimeters of mercury, baroreceptors in your aortic arch and carotid arteries are going to detect that like that. It's going to send a signal to your medulla oblongata, I'll just call it medulla, and it has an autonomic regulatory center called the cardiac center, that's for your heart, and vasomotor. Vaso means vessel and motor means movement of muscle. Okay, so the medulla stimulates, heart rate goes up, arteries vasoconstrict, and they vasoconstrict because inside your arteries you have smooth muscle, so that is muscle responding. So both increased heart rate and arterial vasoconstriction will increase your blood pressure. Look at the arrows. At the start of the pathway, the arrow is going down. At the end of negative feedback, it better be going back up. Okay, Let's look at what happens when blood pressure is too high. If blood pressure is too high, that means it's above 160 millimeters of mercury. The same baroreceptors are going to detect that very quickly. The same integrating center is going to respond, okay? The cardiac and vasomotor center of the medulla. Now, if heart rate going up increases blood pressure, what should decreasing heart rate do to blood pressure? Bingo, it'll bring it down. Now, the garden hose analogy. If you vasoconstrict an artery and the pressure running through the artery goes up, what happens when you vasodilate the artery and open it up wide? Or take your thumb off the garden hose, right? The pressure goes down. That's exactly what happens, okay? So remember, if heart rate goes up, blood pressure goes up. If heart rate goes down, blood pressure goes down. If arteries clamp down and vasoconstrict, blood pressure goes up. If arteries vasodilate, blood pressure will drop. Okay, so that's the last of the negative feedback loop for this chapter. Now, next slide. You can click within this PowerPoint or just go to the syllabus to get the regulation of blood pressure when it's too high or too low and the keys. Okay, so this is your reminder on this slide to check that out. Okay, so let's move on. I put a review slide in here for you guys so you can see what we've covered. This is a good place when you're studying to go back through and review everything you've studied up until that point. Okay, pH. This is going to be short. So pH, you guys to get in this class should have taken Chemistry 101 and 102. You're not going to need all that chemistry for this class, but you are going to need to understand some basics of chemistry. And in this chapter, pH. Your body regulates pH through a negative feedback loop as well. I'm not going to go into that. I'll wait till we get to the respiratory chapter. But you should know the importance of pH in body function. Okay, so this, don't memorize this per se. Certainly do not memorize the figure here, okay? You don't need to know that over here. But do know that pH is based on hydrogen ions and hydroxide ions. The more hydrogen ions are present, the more acidic something is. The more hydroxide ions are present, the more alkaline something is. Okay, and you should know the pH scale. It's a scale of 0 to 14, where in the center, 7 is neutral. Anything less than 7 is considered acidic, and anything larger than 7 is considered alkaline. Now, pH is important in human health, and we'll talk about that because basically how molecules function. And chemical reactions are based on pH. And so if your blood pH is not correct and within its narrow range, all enzyme activity in your body is going to be hampered. All chemical reactions in your body are going to be hamstrung. And that is going to prevent your body from maintaining homeostasis. So pH is necessary for all the chemical reactions that happen in your body, and those chemical reactions allow you to maintain homeostasis. So let's get to the applied part of pH. I will probably ask you on a future quiz on this chapter how alkaline or acidic is something relative to something else. And so when you were in chemistry, you had to do this with logarithmic calculations of hydroxide to hydrogen ions. I'm going to simplify it for you. So I'm looking at this diagram here on the right, okay? And here I ask you, how much more acidic is urine with a pH of 6 than baking soda, which is more alkaline with a pH of 9? I'm going to escape to be able to do the calculations, and I'll make this as big as I possibly can. Okay, so here's what you do. First, you are going to subtract the higher number, pH of 9, minus the lower pH number of 6, and that difference is going to be 3. What you'll do then is you'll simply put down 3 zeros, 1, 2, 3, and in the front of those zeros, put a 1. The 3 means put 3 0 down. That means that urine is 1,000 times more acidic than baking soda, or you could say baking soda is 1,000 times more alkaline than urine. You can also use scientific notation, but make sure that you do it correctly. So you could put 1 times 10 to the third exponent, and you do have to put that as an exponent, which means you have to make it a superscript. Okay. And since I don't have a pen for this computer, we'll just that way, okay? So that's the answer. Now, do you think you can figure out how to determine how much more acidic stomach acid is than distilled water? You take the higher number, right? 7 minus 1 gives you 6. So that tells us we're going to put down 6 zeros. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I'll go to the very front of that, and I'll put A1. And to be good about it, I'll put in the commas where they belong. That's a million, right? So that's a million times. Stomach acid is a million times more acidic than pure distilled water. Or you could do the scientific notation route, which is 1 times 10 to the 6th. Oops, not 9, the 6th. And I'm gonna do this. This means, well, if I should do it right, I should have the superscript there. Okay, that's it. Okay, so I'm going to let you guys figure this last one out, and I might have it in a future quiz, okay, or I'll give you an example. Would you know how to figure out how much more acidic stomach acid is than soap? Yep, 12 minus 1 equals 11. That's 1 and then 11 zeros. Okay, so I think you understand it. So let's go back to full screen so you can see well. So, pH. Blood pH ranges from 7.35 to 7.45. That's pretty darn hard. That's narrow, okay? If your blood gets below that, it's called acidosis and it's bad, okay? Practically an emergency. If your blood rises above the 7.45, that's called alkalosis. That's equally bad and as much of an emergency. So the reason it's so important for blood pH to be maintained is that, well, let me give you an example. If your blood pH drops, and it can drop when you have kidney failure. It can drop when you have respiratory problems. Definitely can affect it. People who have COVID, all right, who aren't respirating like they should, they're not ventilating very well. They're probably going through respiratory acidosis because they're not getting rid of enough CO2 from their blood. And here's some of the things that can happen to people. If your blood pH is too low, too acidic, your oxygen can't be carried as well on hemoglobin, your respiratory pigment hemoglobin. When your blood is carrying oxygen, it won't let go of that oxygen when it gets to the tissues, and you'll become hypoxic, which means you'll have low oxygen in your blood. You'll be turning blue. It affects all the chemical reactions in your body as well. So acidic blood can cause a hemoglobin to not carry oxygen very well. Okay, so the systems that regulate blood pH the fastest, it's going to be your lungs. Your lungs can change your blood pH within seconds, and we'll cover that when we get to that chapter. That's the fastest. And so if you type in page 10 on the wiki textbook on your PDF, it'll bring you right to that where I talk about that. The next system that can regulate blood pH, but it's a little slower to do it, are your kidneys, by how much hydrogen ions they secrete in urine and how much hydroxide ions they retain in the blood. And then lastly, your liver can maintain blood pH. And I'm going to talk about how your liver regulates blood pH in chapter 2, part 1, our next chapter. Okay? All right, so thus endeth chapter 1, your introduction to homeostasis and negative feedback loops. All right.